Investigations and accountability will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Without objection, the gentleman from New York, Mr. Desposito, is permitted to sit on the dais and ask questions to the witnesses. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the expansion of the CBP ONE mobile application. While the app was created for commercial purposes, the Biden administration has expanded its purpose in January of 2023 to allow otherwise inadmissible aliens to schedule appointments directly at port of entry with U.S. Customs and Border Protection and be mass paroled into the interior. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Mr. Ranking Member, fellow members of the committee, ladies and gentlemen, appearing before us, welcome to the Subcommittee on Border Security and Enforcement and the Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigations, and Accountability. This is a joint hearing on the Customs and Border Protection's CBP ONE mobile application. The purpose of today's hearing is to examine how the Biden administration and the Department of Homeland Security have expanded the use of CBP ONE to parole inadmissible aliens into the United States. This hearing will focus on DHS's use of CBP ONE to institute so-called lawful pathways for illegal aliens without proper documentation, the application's functions and features, and the security risks that might be exploited by cartels. DHS continues to fail in its basic Homeland Security mission to secure the border. Secretary Mayorkas's open border policies, fueled by the expansion of CBP ONE app, has allowed virtually any foreign national from abroad to make an appointment to enter the country. Simply put, this application's users know that a CBP ONE appointment is their ticket into the United States. In January 2023, the Department of Homeland Security announced that CBP ONE would be expanded to include an appointment scheduling function for illegal aliens without prior authorization to register for inspection and processing at ports of entry. CBP ONE was created to reduce wait times for perishable commercial goods passing through these ports of entry for legal trade. But the Mayorkas DHS has repurposed the CBP ONE app. Under Secretary Mayorkas, we've seen over 460,000 illegal aliens schedule appointments to present at these ports using the CBP ONE app. Most of these illegal aliens are paroled and released into the United States, and in most cases, we really don't know who they are. This is an abuse of parole by design. CBP originally allowed 1,000 CBP ONE appointments per day as of May of 2023. 3 months later, it was increased to 1,450 per day. Ironically, the department continues to praise CBP ONE's appointment capabilities while failing to do the thing that would solve the crisis, which is stop the flow of illegals across our southern border. Documents received by our committee show that from January through September 2023, more than 266,000, or nearly 96% of those illegal aliens who scheduled appointments via CBP ONE were simply issued a notice to appear and paroled into the United States. This means that only 4% of illegal alien parolees are detained or removed. CBP ONE is now being weaved into other parole programs like the Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, and Venezuelan, or the CHNV parole program and family reunification parole, or FRP, which includes nationals and immediate family members from Colombia, Cuba, Ecuador, El Salvador, Guatemala, Haiti, and Honduras. Through the end of 2024, over 357,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans were granted parole. But in the end, Secretary Mayorkas' shell game doesn't end here. Illegal aliens are also taking advantage of a significant CBP ONE loophole, which allows them to present themselves at a port of entry instead of scheduling an appointment via the app if they experience problems due to, quote, language barrier, illiteracy, significant technical failure, or other ongoing and serious obstacles. There are also numerous technical and security problems with CBP ONE. Secretary Mayorkas has encouraged those aliens to make use of the so-called lawful, safe, and orderly pathways by using CBP ONE. Secretary Mayorkas has stated that these border policies are safe, orderly, and humane, but anyone familiar with the CBP ONE app knows that his border policies are somewhat of a racket designed to expedite illegal immigration into America and leave us at risk. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses today. I recognize.
One of the most important challenges this country has had in a very, very long time. You could think about it as immigration. I look at it as immigration, refugees, terrorist issue, all rolled into one. CBP ONE is just one tool of many other tools that we have in the tool chest right now to address these issues. It's not enough, though, just to look at CBP ONE. We have to look also at the people that are actually coming to our ports of entry and requesting protections. We need to look at the totality, how the administration is addressing migration before people ever reach our borders. And that's why I'm glad that the State Department could join us here today. Bottom line, we are witnessing today a worldwide migration movement like we've never seen, probably ever. Reasons, we're emerging from COVID that has devastated the world's economies. South of the border, we have economies and nations that are essentially non-functional anymore. Of course, all of us read the newspaper headlines about Haiti, but there are many other headlines that I would say we never talk about on a daily basis, and all of those should also hold our attention. And we have to look at this issue comprehensively. What's the challenge? What are the root causes? And how to manage what I would call a worldwide migration of refugees. It's not only the United States. I've talked to the Colombian ambassador. I visited Colombia. They have 3 million Venezuelans. Costa Rica, and all of you have heard me say this, Costa Rican ambassador telling us they're struggling. They're at the breaking point with their refugees, and Mexico, of course, as well. And we can look at Europe as well. They have their challenges as well, and others around the country. It's not a Democrat or Republican issue. We've got to work collectively to address these issues. So I'm glad that, for example, myself and Congressman Luttrell put out a piece of legislation called Emerging Innovative Border Technologies Act, really asking the DHS to identify, integrate, and deploy cutting-edge commercial technologies to improve border security. Mr. Chairman, and you and I have also worked on legislation together. We got to come together and figure this out. CBP ONE is just one of the many tools this administration is employing to try to manage the border challenges. To be clear, under our laws, migrants have always been able to approach our ports of entry to ask for protection. This is nothing new. And CBP ONE is just one tool that we use to manage this flow. It's not enough just to say this is a U.S. issue. It's not our issue. It's not Mexico's issue. It's not Canada's issue. It's a hemispheric issue. We've got to work with our partners, our friends, to fix this issue, because it's not going away. CBP ONE, yes, but this issue, if you go south of the border again, look at those economies. Central America, South America, it's not going away. I ask all of you today to give us your thoughts. CBP ONE, I want to hear more about it. What exactly does CBP ONE do? My colleague, Chairman Higgins, says it's a ticket to the U.S. I want to know under what conditions is it a ticket into the U.S.? How many of those people that apply for CBP ONE are actually given that golden ticket to come to the U.S.? How many of those people that come into the U.S. can actually work or not work? I remember about a year and a half ago, being at the Tijuana border, in Tijuana, San Isidro border, to look at the Ukrainian refugee camps that were being set up by the U.S. And I thought, this is the way to do it. Ukrainians would fly into Mexico, go into Tijuana, go into a baseball field that had been essentially created into a makeshift refugee center. Those refugees would come in. Within 48 hours, they were processed. Pedestrian crossing west was open. They would come into the U.S. There would be a relative or family that would assume financial responsibility for them. They were given a parole, a 2-year permit, and then they disappeared into the U.S. That's one way of handling it. I think it's a good way of handling it because you haven't seen that issue emerge again. So I want to thank our witnesses today for being here. Hope you educate us into the specifics, the details of CBP ONE, and how this has become part of your toolkit, your tool chest, to address the challenges that you have at our border. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
Thank you, Ranking Member Correa. I now recognize the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigations, and Accountability, the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, I think I'd remark as I open my statement that I always appreciate the ranking member from California and the collegial tone of his remarks. I will say that I'm going to articulate a point of view that very respectfully takes a different view than the comments he just offered in his opening statement. It is true that there is a lot of migration in the world today. A lot of that is the product of a destabilized world that results from the absence of strong leadership in the White House of the United States and grievous errors in judgment across the globe. But the inception of the dramatic change in our border security is extremely clear as to causation. It occurred immediately after the election in the run-up to the inauguration and bloomed into an historic disaster that continues now 4 years later in increasing proportions because of dramatic 180-degree reversals of policy of administration of the border. And if you are concerned about a crisis at long last, the very last thing that you can do to solve the crisis is to disregard what you did to cause it in the first place. We've had many hearings on the global picture with respect to border security. And I know that there are differences on the respective sides of the aisle, and I have great respect for my colleagues, but the evidence is clear, and frankly, the American people understand the evidence because they are living it in every community. The snapshot on the situation today is one little part that has extraordinary significance in itself, but it is just one piece. The CBP ONE mobile application, something that sounds very hip and modern. We created an app. We gave it a catchy name. But what lies behind the app is the same sort of abuse of power, executive power, to make things up that are not in the law and to use it and to give it a role in facilitating mass illegal immigration into the United States. Since January 2023, the Department of Homeland Security has expanded the use of the CBP ONE application in two ways, specifically to implement a purposeful and determined open borders agenda. First, inadmissible aliens located in Mexico can use the CBP ONE app to schedule appointments at the southwest border. Just schedule an appointment, like you're going to visit the doctor. Second, inadmissible aliens, this is the one we've revealed the most about lately. It's been out there for a while, but the scale of it's becoming clear. Inadmissible aliens from certain countries like Cuba, Haiti, Venezuela, and Nicaragua who participate in the department's parole programs that abuse the limits of the Secretary's parole authority can use the CBP ONE app to request permission to fly from the city of origin right into cities throughout the United States, into U.S. airports. Now let's hear the numbers. Let's hear them. And the numbers, when you hear people tell them they're very slightly, but this is essentially the numbers. To date, more than 459,000 CBP ONE appointments have been scheduled at the southwest border ports of entry. In 2023 alone, more than 320,000 inadmissible aliens flew into U.S. airports through so-called parole programs using CBP ONE. And these numbers do not even count toward the over 2.8 million aliens crossing our borders illegally nationwide since January 2023, which was the date of the beginning of use of CBP ONE for this human-moving thing as opposed to the commercial purpose it was originally designed for. The aliens using CBP ONE aren't just getting appointments, and they're not just hopping on flights. They are also nearly categorically being released into the United States. According to the department's own data, from January through September 2023, 96%, Mr. Higgins said it, of aliens with CBP ONE appointments at the southwest border were released. The probability of release is just as assured as for those flying into airports. From January through June 2023, 97% of aliens who flew into a U.S. airport were paroled into the United States. You've heard the saying, every state is a border state. Now you understand exactly another dimension why. This is astonishing, considering that the department recently admitted in litigation that allowing these aliens to fly into U.S. airports creates, quote, operational vulnerabilities that could be exploited by bad actors, end quote. The administration claims that the use of the CBP ONE app will slow the flow of aliens illegally entering the United States and cut cartels out of the migration process. I remember when Secretary Mayorkas came and made that very claim. We're going to see, he said he was a little smug the first time he appeared to say it. The numbers soon overwhelmed all the circumstances again, and it didn't even last for long. So those claims belie the facts. Or excuse me, the facts belie those claims. Since the CBP ONE expansion in January 2023, encounters of illegal aliens have reached monthly all-time highs, even well beyond the historic highs that began with the inauguration of the Biden administration, and are on pace to reach 2 million again this fiscal year. Meanwhile, cartels are still in firm control of the migration process across the American border. They control the smuggling routes that aliens use to get to Mexico. They actively exploit security loopholes in CBP ONE to schedule appointments at the border. They clearly still control the southwest border, and they continue to make the United States government the logistics arm of the international drug cartels. Alarmingly, data from the department shows that aliens that make it to Mexico to schedule CBP-1 appointments at the southwest border come from what the FBI considers special interest countries, including Russia, China, and Iran. Despite the department's claim that inadmissible aliens are thoroughly screened and vetted, we know that the process is inadequate. If an alien has a criminal record in his country of origin, CBP has almost no way of knowing. How many of the approximately 750,000 aliens that have been released into this country under the administration's expansion of the CBP ONE app have gone on to commit acts of violence against Americans? The country has witnessed the tragic results of these programs in the recent rape of a 15-year-old child in Massachusetts by a Haitian allowed into the U.S. through the CHNV program. The American people deserve robust screening and vetting processes for all prospective entrants. They deserve a secure border, and they deserve a federal government that upholds its fundamental duty to honor the law and to protect the safety and security of the American people. With the expansion of CBP ONE, however, I know that the administration once again intends on only managing the public perception of illegal immigration instead of actually securing the border. I want to thank these witnesses for being here and to take our questions. I look forward to their testimony. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you, Chairman Bishop. I now recognize the ranking member for the Subcommittee on Oversight, Investigations, and Accountability, the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Ivey, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, and I want to thank the witnesses for appearing today. And I also want to welcome Congressman Swazi, our newest member, and I want to thank the New York voters for sending you here. And I want to note, too, and you'll have a chance to speak about this more, that, you know, one of you just said a moment ago that the American people have a particular view about this, but the congressman campaigned on trying to find bipartisan solutions to the immigration issue, to the border crisis, as you call it. And the voters picked him, I think, in large part because of that. So congratulations, and we welcome your insight. And you got previous experience as a member. In fact, you've got more experience than I do as a member, so welcome to the committee. I was hoping his first hearing was going to be on the exact issue that he ran on, which is fixing the crisis at the border. And I was hoping that one of those fixes we could make would be considering the bipartisan Senate bill that took a comprehensive look at how to fix it. And whether you like everything in the bill or not isn't really the issue. The hope I had was that we could at least take it up. We could have amendments and debates and the like, and you know, if we had to add something or to take something, that's fine. But let's try and find a bipartisan solution to this issue. Unfortunately, that's not where we seem to be going right now. I think our recent history, you know, just before you got here, this committee spent months on the illegitimate impeachment of the secretary, Mr. Mayorkas, and we had hearing after hearing after hearing. The committee generated, the Republican staff generated, I don't know, several hundreds of pages of allegations and this and that. And they swore up and down that they had to impeach him because that's what they needed to do to fix the problem at the border. And we told them at the time, A, it was unconstitutional and illegitimate because they didn't even come close to meeting the standard of high crimes and misdemeanors. So they had to kind of fabricate standards. But more importantly, it wouldn't change anything of what's going on day to day on the ground down there. What we told them at the time, and I'm continuing to say that today, is we need to definitely add more resources at the border. And I'll be asking you questions about that when the time comes up. But the Senate bill would have added 200 CBP officers, increased the number of USCIS officers examining asylum claims by 800. We've got a supplemental proposal from the White House that we didn't really do much with. And I know we've gotten testimony not only from, you know, witnesses at this table, but when we went to the border down in Texas, what was that, a few months ago, and had a chance to speak to them directly, and they said, we need more resources. We need more people down here. You know, we've got one guy covering X hundred miles of border. We've got people burning out. We've got people leaving because this is damaging to their families. They're relocating people to different places and the like, and they just don't have enough bodies to do it. And I know there's been some conversations and even some hearings about adding numbers to that, but we're struggling to get there. Hopefully the bill that's coming through, the minibus, I guess we're calling it, will help to address this in an immediate way. But we're still, kind of dragging our feet on that because we're focusing on the small issues instead of the big issues like that one. And I also think, too, that the messages aren't just coming from Democrats, they're coming from the Supreme Court. Justice Kavanaugh, and I quoted his language and his opinion multiple times, not only in this committee, but on the floor. But one of the things that Justice Kavanaugh wrote in United States v. Texas, which struck down or threw out one of the cases that Texas brought on this issue, and I'll do it from memory, I guess, at this point. For the past 27 years and 5 presidencies, these policies have been in place, the prosecutorial discretion policies, because they just don't have enough resources to hold everybody. So whoever is in charge has to make a decision about who gets released and who doesn't. Now, they complain about who gets released, and they'll pull up cases about somebody gets released and does something bad, and, fair enough, but the only way to fix it is to put more resources and expand the number of people who can address the problem. That would include, for example, judges, dramatically increasing the number of judges who can hear these cases so it doesn't take 6 or 7 years, maybe it takes 6 or 7 months. If we start turning people back quicker, then that might be one way to address this problem too, and send the message back that you don't just get to come here and stay for 6 years. But we haven't made much headway on that with my colleagues on the other side either. And I just want to read this comment from Senator Lankford. He's one of the individuals who led the crafting of the bipartisan Senate bill, and he's a Republican from Oklahoma and had been viewed as a very conservative member up until he came out with this bill, and former President Trump sort of vilified him for that, and the Speaker and some of the House Republican colleagues got in step with that. But here's what he said: "Welcome to governance. You can do a partisan bill in the House, but in the Senate, we have to look at each other across the aisle, then figure out a way to be able to solve this." And so I'm hoping that we can prove him wrong at some point, that we will get to a point here in the House where we decide we really want to try and do something and solve this. I know we've had bills considered here in the committee before. My recollection from one of those markups was, I think every amendment the Democrats offered was rejected on a party line vote, if I recall correctly. I think you might have gotten something done on the floor, but other than that. And then during the impeachment hearing, they rejected all of the amendments on the party line vote up until they got tired of hearing them. And then they just summarily dismissed like 30 of the amendments. We didn't have a chance to vote on them. So I'm hoping we can move away from that approach and get to the point where we're actually considering trying to work together. I feel like I've been able to do that with some of my colleagues on the other side. Congressman Bishop, I think we've been able to do hearings together in a way that's been, in my view, bipartisan, and we've been able to address those issues. We don't agree on everything, but at least we hash it out. And I'm hoping that we can get there on this issue too, because it's too important to the American people to just keep letting it drift off in these, for these political reasons. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Ivey. I now recognize the chairman of the whole committee, the Committee on Homeland Security, Chairman Green, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate you letting me sit in on your committee, both of you, and the ranking members. I appreciate them. Have deep respect for all the folks who sit on this committee on both sides of the aisle. A lot of long nights have happened, markups, and we've got a markup coming up here pretty soon that should be a little easier with some bills from both sides. But I do want to take issue, though, with some of the things that have been said today. This notion about a historic migration crisis. I tend to agree with Mr. Bishop. You can trace the causation of this. There's a massive shift in policy. There have been no significant increase in weather events in Latin America. Their GDPs actually increased. So you can blame COVID if you want to, but since COVID, their GDPs have all gone up. It's not an issue of COVID causing the issue, certainly not now. It really pushes reason to suggest that it's not, because we just completely did away with any constraints and created incredible incentives. If you come, you just get released into the country. People tested the system, they called home, and mass waves came. I mean, it's quite simple. I mean, if it was an asylum issue, you get out of your country, you're in the next country, well, you're safe. But they don't do that. They keep coming. It's not that issue. And it's not an issue of just Latin America. I mean, we're talking 160 countries encountered at the southwest border. The notion that it might be because people have different color skin, that's just crazy, because when I was there were a huge group of Russians coming through. It's funny, we want to block Russians from going into Ukraine, but we seem to want to welcome them into the United States if they fill out the CBP ONE app. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but doesn't seem to make a lot of sense to 80% of the Americans too if you poll them right now. In terms of the conduct of the committee recently and whether or not we should have impeached our first sitting cabinet secretary in the history of the country, you know, I've made my position very clear on this. The law is the law. The Constitution's the Constitution. The Constitution says Congress writes the laws and the executive branch executes them. And you can look at all the previous impeachments in the past, every single one of them basically made the argument that the executive branch didn't get to pick which ones they wanted to enforce and which ones they didn't. And that brings us to this discussion about CBP ONE. And this thing was designed for customs to get trade in. And I love Mr. Correa's comments on this. And he's been really on top of how we need to facilitate the trade. And I appreciate in previous committee hearings how you've really pushed that issue. And I liked CBP ONE for that. But making it a blanket automatic parole is against the law. Shall detain. That's what the law says. And it's interesting, the law doesn't say to DAs across the country, you shall capture every murderer. But it does say you shall detain everybody who comes in and has a felony conviction. But Mr. Mayorkas was very clear. No, you don't have to do that, employees of DHS, despite what the law says. And we can't have cabinet secretaries who just get to make it up on their own. That's not what the Constitution, our founders, they spread power out, and that's how we get freedom. But a rogue cabinet secretary who just gets to make up and do whatever he wants because he doesn't like the current system, that's just not how the Constitution is set up. So should we pass some laws and fix these issues? Yes, we should. I'd love to fix immigration law. The problem is we got an unsecure border. It's like an arterial bleed, 9 million people. I mean, just think of the teachers we've had to add in the country. If we want a 35-to-1 ratio, that's about 15,000 teachers for this number of kids that have come in. Where are we going to get those in a blink of an eye? It's untenable. And of course, the crime and stuff that's associated with it, when the cartels take advantage of this mass migration wave created by the change in the paradigm shift, is the reason for it. So I think getting to the bottom of just how the CBP ONE app is being used is very important. I think it's critical, actually, because particularly these special privileges being provided to countries without there being any law passed on that needs to be deeply delved into. And I appreciate both chairmen for putting this committee hearing together, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses. I yield.
Gentleman yields. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record. I'm pleased to welcome our panel of witnesses, and I again apologize that there was delay getting started, but we appreciate your patience. I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States House of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. Thank you all. You please be seated. I'd like to now formally introduce our witnesses. Mr. Adam Hunter is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Immigration Policy at the Department of Homeland Security. He was appointed on January 20th, 2021. Mr. Hunter has more than 15 years' experience in migration, national security, and international affairs issues. Before assuming his role at DHS, he was the Executive Director of Refugee Council USA, an organization working to protect and welcome refugees, asylum seekers, and other forcibly displaced populations. During a previous tenure in government, Mr. Hunter served as Acting Chief of Staff at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services and held other agency leadership and program management roles. Our next witness is Ms. Diane Sabatino. She's the Acting Executive Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Field Operations within the United States Customs and Border Protection. As the senior official for the Office of Field Operations, Ms. Sabatino is responsible for overseeing the operations of 20 major field offices, 328 ports of entry, and over 70 locations in over 40 countries internationally. She leads more than 32,000 employees and oversees an annual operating budget of $7.5 billion. Ms. Sabatino previously served as the Deputy Executive Assistant Commissioner of the Office of Field Operations. Our next witness is Ms. Tammy Meckley. She's the Associate Director for the Immigration Records and Identity Services Directorate at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. Ms. Meckley began her role as the Associate Director in February 2015. In this role, she manages the E-Verify and Systematic Alien Verification for Entitlements, the SAVE programs. She oversees the largest FOIA program in the federal government and leads USCIS's e-processing initiative, which connects previously separate technology systems within the agency to improve decision timeliness, increase transparency during the application process, and accelerate the availability of online filing for all immigration benefits. Our next witness is Ms. Marta Youth. She is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Department of State's Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration. She joined the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration as a Deputy Assistant Secretary in November 2020. Ms. Youth oversees the Office of the Executive Director, the Office of International Migration, and the Office of Assistance for Western Hemisphere. Ms. Youth was previously the Director of Central American Affairs in the Bureau of Western Hemisphere Affairs. Ms. Youth has been a Foreign Service officer for more than 25 years and is a member of the Senior Foreign Service. I thank the witnesses for being here today. The witnesses' full statements will appear in the record. And I now recognize Mr. Hunter for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Higgins, Ranking Member Correa, Chairman Bishop, Ranking Member Ivey, and Chairman Green. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and discuss the Department of Homeland Security's efforts to carry out its statutory border security and enforcement missions. At our southwest border, we continue to experience the impacts of global trends that have been building for many years. Violence, food insecurity, severe poverty, corruption, climate change, and more recently, the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic have all contributed to a significant increase in displacement around the world. These conditions drive unprecedented movements of people in our own hemisphere too, where failing authoritarian regimes in Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, along with a worsening security and humanitarian crisis in Haiti, exacerbate conditions, and smugglers and cartels are all too eager to put migrants' lives at risk for profit. You'll hear more from my State Department colleague about these drivers, as well as the administration's comprehensive hemispheric approach to reduce irregular migration in collaboration with partner governments in the region. For DHS's part, we execute upon a two-part strategy to reduce irregular migration by strengthening consequences for individuals who cross the border unlawfully, while also expanding lawful pathways and processes to incentivize use of safe and orderly alternatives to irregular migration. From our enhanced use of expedited removal, our increased removals and returns of individuals without a legal basis to remain in the country, to the circumvention of lawful pathways rule and other efforts, we are imposing serious consequences for unlawful entry. Through the expansion of lawful pathways and processes, including the CHNV parole processes and scheduling through the CBP ONE app at the border, we provide alternatives to irregular migration. Taken together, DHS has changed the calculus for migrants and further disincentivized the irregular journey, which often includes putting their lives in the hands of smugglers. Our efforts have yielded positive results. Between returning to full Title VIII processing enforcement on May 12, 2023 to now, DHS has removed or returned more than 630,000 individuals, the vast majority of whom crossed the southwest border. Put another way, our removals and returns over the last 10-month period alone exceeds each and every full fiscal year total going back to 2013. Border encounters are also lower this quarter, with encounters of Cuban, Haitian, Nicaraguan, and Venezuelan nationals all notably below their peaks. Consequences are, however, not sufficient to deter irregular migration alone. To be most effective, the consequences we enforce must be paired with incentives for migrants to use safe, orderly, and lawful processes. The CBP ONE application specifically was first deployed in October 2020. Over time, new functionalities have been added. The app itself is not a pathway, rather it is an operational tool that supports CBP processes and services. The CBP ONE functionality used by non-citizens along the southwest border is limited to a scheduling function of an appointment. Under the Immigration and Nationality Act, codified under Title VIII of the U.S. Code, the department is required to inspect non-citizens who present at a port of entry within the United States. The app is therefore for us an important tool for managing the border, more efficiently processing those who present, and safely and orderly carrying out DHS's responsibilities under law. By allowing individuals to directly schedule an appointment from central and northern Mexico, the CBP ONE app effectively cuts out smugglers, decreases migrant exploitation, and improves safety and security. More than 500,000 non-citizens have successfully scheduled an appointment. As my colleague from U.S. Customs and Border Protection will discuss, CBP's inspection, screening and vetting, processing at ports, and releases on parole from our custody have occurred under prior administrations and exist under our existing Title VIII authorities. DHS continues to deliver strengthened consequences for non-citizens who do not establish a lawful basis to remain in the United States, while simultaneously offering safe and orderly processes for non-citizens at our ports of entry. I'm proud to work alongside the dedicated 260,000 employees who make up DHS throughout its headquarters and operational components. The department remains eager to work with this committee and other congressional leaders on a bipartisan basis to update the United States' framework and provide for durable solutions. In the meantime, DHS will utilize every tool currently at its disposal and within its authorities to secure the border and create a safe, orderly, and humane immigration system. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hunter. I now recognize Ms. Sabatino for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chairman Higgins, Ranking Member Correa, Chairman Bishop, Ranking Member Ivey, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. It's an honor to testify today and discuss U.S. Customs and Border Protection's use of mobile technology to modernize operations at our ports of entry as part of CBP's critical mission to secure our borders and facilitate lawful travel and trade. I'm proud to represent the more than 32,000 dedicated personnel of CBP's Office of Field Operations, commonly referred to as OFO, who work tirelessly every day across 328 ports of entry to protect our border, our homeland, and our communities. We must balance complex mission sets, including encountering inadmissible persons, facilitating lawful travel and trade, and combating criminal smuggling. Innovative technology has always been a critical aspect of our efforts to increase security, streamline and modernize processes, and improve stakeholder experiences. Since its deployment in October 2020, the CBP ONE mobile application has served as a single portal to a variety of CBP services. CBP ONE is a secure and flexible platform that effectively and efficiently supports multiple OFO enforcement processes and stakeholder services as part of our longstanding security and facilitation operations. For instance, the app has a role in the Department of Homeland Security processes such as for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans, commonly referred to as CHNV. Subsequent to sponsor, screening, and vetting with U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, non-citizens may apply for advanced travel authorization from CBP through an automated process and will undergo biometric and biographic screening. The app streamlines this process by performing multiple systems checks, freeing officers from time-consuming manual data entry, and allows officers to focus on their important vetting activities as well as other mission priorities at ports of entry. All individuals are vetted against law enforcement holdings, which includes the watch list, TEX, which is a comprehensive records database, travel data, criminal records, NCIC, and information provided by our U.S. government and international law enforcement partners. The app also provides a scheduling function, enabling non-citizens located in central and northern Mexico to submit advance information and make an appointment to present themselves at a specified land border port of entry for inspection and processing. This replaced a manual process that had previously been coordinated with NGOs. The app increases security by enabling the submission of advance information that assists officers in identifying bad actors and preparing questions before an individual arrives at the border. This streamlines the inspection process, tying data together, which directly supports our CBP officers during their inspections. Without advance information provided through the app, processing at the southwest border ports of entry would divert officers from other mission priorities, like interdicting illicit narcotics such as fentanyl, conducting important outbound operations looking for weapons and currency, and processing legitimate trade and travel, which directly supports our economy. The app is a valuable tool for modernizing and improving processes, but in no way does the technology replace the experience and expertise of a CBP officer. All non-citizens who arrive at a port of entry are inspected by a CBP officer. Our officers verify the identity, nationality, citizenship, and stated intent for entry of individuals, review law enforcement systems for prior immigration encounters or criminal history, and interview the individual. The integration of CBP ONE as part of our comprehensive border management operations provides the best information possible to our CBP officers, which allows our officers to do what they do best, which is talking to people to determine intent and increase situational awareness. We facilitate the flow of trillions of dollars in legitimate cargo every year while enforcing hundreds of trade laws to protect American businesses and consumers. And at the same time, we are facilitating growing volumes of international travel across all of our international operating environments. The efficiencies such as the collection of advance information strengthens the security of our borders and enhances our ability to address irregular migration challenges without compromising our missions, including, again, interdicting illicit drugs and facilitating the flow of legitimate trade and travel to ensure continued national and economic security. I appreciate the subcommittee's continued support of our mission as well as our workforce, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sabatino. I now recognize Ms. Meckley for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
Chairman Green, Chairman Higgins, Chairman Bishop, Ranking Members Thompson, Correa, Ivy, and distinguished members of the subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you today about the operations of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. USCIS is the government agency that oversees lawful immigration to the United States, and I am proud to serve with over 20,000 government employees who work at more than 200 USCIS field offices across the country and the world to accomplish this mission. USCIS remains steadfast in its commitment to ensuring a fair, orderly, and humane immigration system consistent with U.S. law and international obligations. As part of our mission, USCIS helps administer parole processes for Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans and their immediate family members. These processes are designed to help support the Department of Homeland Security's broader strategy to disincentivize irregular migration by simultaneously expanding the availability of safe, orderly, and lawful processes and strictly enforcing our nation's immigration laws by imposing consequences on individuals who do not avail themselves of these lawful pathways. I am here today to explain USCIS's role in the execution of these parole processes. DHS established the parole process for Venezuelans in October 2022 and the parole processes for Cubans, Haitians, and Nicaraguans in January 2023. Through these processes, certain nationals of Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, CHNV, and their immediate family members may request to come to the United States in a safe and orderly way. The processes are capped at 30,000 parolees per month across the 4 nationalities. USCIS's role in the CHNV process is to assess whether a potential supporter in the United States who commits to providing financial and other support for the beneficiary by filing a Form I-134A online request to be a supporter and declaration of financial support meets established requirements. To serve as a supporter in this process, an individual or an individual representing an entity must be a U.S. citizen, national, or lawful permanent resident, or hold a lawful status in the United States, such as temporary protected status, asylum, or be a parolee or recipient of deferred action for deferred enforcement departure. The potential supporter must show evidence of sufficient financial resources to qualify as a supporter for purposes of CHNV parole process. USCIS uses federal poverty guidelines as a general guide to assess financial sufficiency. Potential supporters who file a Form I-134A on behalf of a beneficiary under these processes must be willing and able to receive, maintain, and support the listed beneficiary for the duration of their parole and articulate how they will do so. USCIS employs a multifaceted approach to screening and vetting potential supporters. At filing, the system checks are initiated automatically on supporters for all submissions. These checks will automatically flag cases with matching records or hits. USCIS officers determine whether the hit relates to the potential supporter. If a hit relates to a potential supporter, the USCIS officer will determine whether the hit impacts the potential supporter's eligibility for these processes. USCIS also uses a wide range of risk-based modeling and biographic searches, initiate referrals to its Fraud Detection National Security Directorate for additional screening of potential supporters, and even site visits or administrative investigation where appropriate. This can occur at all stages of the process and is based on a continuously reassessed risk factor and direct referral from reviewers, tips, or biographic data scrapes. Once a potential supporter has filed the Form I-134A and is confirmed or non-confirmed by USCIS, our role is complete. The beneficiary then receives emailed instructions for creating a USCIS online account and must confirm their biographic information and complete necessary attestations for themselves and, if applicable, immediate family members. Once this information has been submitted, CBP determines whether to issue an advanced travel authorization to the beneficiary and makes a case-by-case parole determination at the port of entry. Thank you again for the opportunity to explain our role, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Meckley. I now recognize Ms. Youth for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
Good afternoon, Chair Higgins, Ranking Member Correa, Chair Bishop, Ranking Member Ivy, Chair Green, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm pleased to be here today to share with you the latest on our efforts to respond to the challenge of irregular migration and forced displacement in the Western Hemisphere. The world is facing historic levels of human mobility, and the Western Hemisphere is no exception. Last year, more than 20 million people were displaced across our region. For an effective response, we need more than humanitarian aid and increased enforcement. We need to consider the unique reasons that people are on the move. Some are fleeing persecution, violence, natural disasters. Others are seeking economic opportunity, and others to be reunified with family members. The administration's comprehensive policy is a solutions-oriented approach. We're working to address the causes that lead people to migrate, create protection and integration mechanisms in the region so that people have the option to remain, the option to remain closer to home, and facilitate safe, humane, orderly, and lawful migration pathways for others. Today, I'll share some of the work we're doing as part of this broad, comprehensive, collaborative approach to migration management in the region. Since 2021, to address irregular migration and ensure our national security, the United States has led an expansion of lawful pathways to the United States. The Safe Mobility Initiative, known by the Spanish name Movilidad Segura, is one of the many ways the United States is facilitating access to safe and lawful pathways to countries in the region so that refugees do not have to undertake dangerous journeys in search of safety. Safe mobility offices are currently operational in Colombia, Costa Rica, Guatemala, and Ecuador. The Safe Mobility Initiative revolutionized how we are able to screen, refer, and process individuals in the region for refugee resettlement. Safe mobility offices also serve as hubs for providing information about lawful pathways, and it informs ineligible individuals about services and programs available to them in their application country or their country of origin so that they could have safe, supported options to remain where they are. We're working to expand the reach and scope of the Safe Mobility Initiative. Strengthening pathways to the United States and other countries through this initiative is groundbreaking and will prove essential to meeting the needs of the day, protecting our border, promoting safe and orderly migration, while still taking advantage of the wealth of benefits that refugees and migrants bring to local communities and the overall economy of the United States. While refugee resettlement is a critical lifeline for certain groups of people, asylum in other countries within Latin America is an excellent option for many in need of international protection. Humanitarian assistance, generously provided by Congress to the Bureau of Population, Refugees, and Migration, has had a significant impact in stabilizing displaced populations in host countries, especially by strengthening access to asylum and regularization in countries like Colombia, Costa Rica, Ecuador, Mexico, and many others. These programs, in conjunction with partner country efforts, have provided access to protection and stability to millions of individuals and have helped to mitigate their movements to the U.S. border to seek safety. The United States is the global leader in delivering humanitarian assistance worldwide, including in the Western Hemisphere. With this assistance, our international humanitarian organization partners deliver life-saving water, support for shelter, sanitation, and emergency medical assistance to refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced persons, stateless persons, and vulnerable migrants. Our assistance stabilizes refugees and vulnerable migrants in their host communities, helps them integrate and rebuild their lives, and find solutions closer to home so that displaced people can remain in host communities and avoid dangerous journeys toward the United States. Responding to the Western Hemisphere's largest migration and forced displacement crisis in history requires an approach as comprehensive as the reasons that people are on the move. When combining stronger lawful pathways and protection options within the region with root causes programming, repatriation, border management, and increased consequences for irregular entry, these efforts make up the administration's holistic approach to create safe, humane, lawful, and orderly migration options within the region. In closing, I'd like to thank the members of these subcommittees for the opportunity to discuss these critical issues and the work we're doing to meet the challenges of the moment. We appreciate your support.
Thank you, Ms. Youth, for your opening statement. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Before I begin, I'd like to welcome Mr. Saouzi. He is I'm going to call you Saouzi forever. The gentleman from New York is indeed a gentleman. He won a special election, and we appreciate his presence on the committee. He's a regular guy at the gym, and so we welcome you here, sir. I look forward to your input. Mr. Hunter, how would you define, it's not a trick question, by the way, how would you define a border, a sovereign border?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A sovereign border in the United States and for any country is critical under laws to ensure it is the responsibility of the country to ensure.
Would you describe the sovereign border as a definite line between a sovereign nation and, say, international waters, or between sovereign nations?
It is indeed, Mr. Chairman.
Indeed it is.
National demarcation, yes.
So you would concur that a sovereign border is a definite line?
It's where the United States exercises its authorities, yes, sir.
Ah.
It is where the United States.
And thus we have shifted. So it's where a sovereign nation exercises its authority upon sovereign soil. Would you say, like our embassies across the world are considered our sovereign soil, are they not?
I believe so. I would defer to my State Department colleague on our consular.
So you initially interpreted a border in the traditional and historical sense of what a border is. I recall years ago on one of my many trips to the border, there was only a couple of us there, and I ventured across the water there on the rocks where the illegal immigrants had been crossing by the hundreds at this particular point. And the agents present were quite concerned lest I take one step too many. As I walked towards the center, there's like, Congressman, don't take another step. Because one more step and I was in Mexico. That's our sovereign border. This is the historical understanding of our border. But in April of 2023, the Department of State and the Department of Homeland Security announced measures to, quote, to reduce unlawful migration across the Western Hemisphere, significantly expand lawful pathways for protection, and facilitate the safe, orderly, and humane processing of migrants, close quote. This is a quote that was cited by a couple of the panelists here before us today. These are the words of the Biden administration. This announcement further expanded the CBP ONE app, creating a whole new parole process and opening, quote, regional processing centers in the Western Hemisphere. As far as we know, the regional processing centers, pay attention, America, with what's going on here. These regional processing centers, also known as safe mobility offices, have been opened in Ecuador, Colombia, Guatemala, and Costa Rica, and have allowed DHS to quickly process illegal immigrants in the cartel pipeline wishing to enter the United States or stating that their intention is to enter the United States should they continue their journey northward in the cartel pipeline that leads to the southern sovereign border of the United States of America. These regional processing centers, which is hard to get a clear picture of, is difficult to get maps, numbers, deployments, mission parameters. Makes no sense to me why, with the historic crisis at our border, hundreds of thousands of individuals entering the country every month, not every year, every month. Makes no sense to most Americans when they discover we're processing and transporting immigrants from within foreign nations, not on sovereign American soil, not through ports of entry, but through these regional processing centers. Under this new system, the entire world has become the sovereign American border by the interpretation of the Biden administration. If you have legal authority to establish regional processing centers in Ecuador, Colombia, Guatemala, and Costa Rica, and I'm about to ask you to please cite that legal authority, then why can you put those up everywhere in the world? We no longer have a sovereign border to defend and enforce our laws. We can process illegal immigrants, undocumented illegal immigrants, unscreened, directly into the interior of our country. This is quite a concern. Ms. Sabatino, from these processing centers are illegal undocumented aliens being registered through CBP ONE app, granted parole, and flown directly into the interior of the United States, bypassing what most Americans would recognize as our sovereign border.
Thank you for the question, Chairman. With respect to individuals processed through the Safe Mobility Office, CBP does not have a role in identifying or
So who
vetting.
would you defer that to, Mr. Hunter?
With respect to the Safe Mobility Office,
With respect to illegal immigrants that are plucked out of the cartel pipeline in Central America at a DHS-established regional processing center, or any of those illegal aliens being flown directly from foreign nations into the interior of our country? Can we get a straight answer there?
Mr. Chairman, the operations at these safe mobility offices are in partnership with the Department of State and these host country governments. What we are doing are screening individuals who are maybe eligible for existing pathways such as refugee resettlement, and we are conducting full refugee resettlement screening and vetting.
Are they being flown into the interior of our country?
If they are indeed approved to be resettled as refugees, then the standard processes apply. They are being organized.
This was
through
this was how you try to get to a yes, America. The answer is yes. Illegal aliens are being pulled from the cartel pipeline at DHS-established regional processing centers in Central and South America and flown directly into the interior of our country. My time has expired, and I now recognize the ranking member for his question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I thank the witnesses for your information here. And I started out talking big picture, resources, causes, but let's bring it down to what we may be able to do here. And so let's break it down. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? So let's start out with what appears to be the issue right now. At the border, flooded with refugees, probably economic refugees, that probably wouldn't qualify for admission under the existing laws of the United States. I don't agree with that law because under this existing law, most of our ancestors probably wouldn't qualify to come to this country. But that's what the U.S. law is right now. You essentially have to establish that you're fleeing from another country for your life, your fear, kind of a more or less legal reason that you can come to the U.S. Challenge right now, and I'm gonna ask all of you to help me frame this, is the processing of the refugees. Is that correct? Is that a big issue at the border right now? Yes? No? Mr. Hunter.
Yes, Mr. Ranking Member. The challenge is the number of individuals that are seeking to enter the United States. We have a requirement under law that we inspect and process every individual who comes to a port of entry.
And you don't have the capability of doing it right now.
Correct. We have limited resources, sir.
You need more processing USCIS offices and immigration judges, which we don't. We have a massive backlog. So let's think about this. Where are we putting our resources? Right now, tomorrow we're gonna vote on a mini bus, we call it mini bus bill. We're gonna fully fund 22,000 Border Patrol agents. These are the green uniforms. That's my understanding. I just read that a couple hours ago. People will process at the gates to the US, essentially, there's only 150 blue uniforms that will be essentially funded tomorrow. I think that's just way too few. And you're essentially the people that are part of that processing to come to the US or not. I don't know if there's any funding for USCIS offices and immigration judges. And again, you got people coming in, you want to process them under the law, which in a reasonable time period. And if you were to do that, probably most of these individuals wouldn't qualify to come to the US. Is that correct? Please, anybody jump in.
Yeah, Mr. Ranking Member, we do see that once individuals are in the United States, they do have the right to claim asylum, and most do before an immigration judge. That process, as you've observed, takes far too long. It can take 5 to 8 years to resolve. And the grant rates ultimately in that process, I believe, are under 30%.
Ms. Sabatino, any thoughts on that?
Agree with Deputy Assistant
Yes.
Secretary Hunter.
Yes. Ms. Meckley? Ms. Youth, any thoughts? What I'm trying to do is trying to figure out what everybody's talking about here, okay? That we have a challenge at the border of refugee crisis, economic or political, under existing laws. If you're an economic refugee, you wouldn't qualify under our laws to come. If you're a refugee because of fearing for life, you would qualify. Yet the argument is CBP ONE is that magic ticket to come to the U.S. Is it, first of all? CBP ONE the magic ticket to come to the U.S.? Or just a processing tool?
I'll take that one.
Yes.
CBP ONE is a processing tool. Certainly prior to the implementation of CBP ONE, with any mass or surge to any of our ports of entry, our officers would have been
You
doing.
check that up against your known databases? Yes, no?
We check it against a host of law
You
enforcement.
vet? Mr. Bishop, I can't read your smile, so tell me, you disagree with that?
Well, gentleman's yielding. I mean, how do they
Yes.
vet the criminal databases or what about where the people are coming from?
Ms. Sabatino, how do you vet this stuff?
We run the individuals against the TSDS or the watch list. We certainly run them against TEX, which is our comprehensive law enforcement database. And that database is comprised of information such as prior immigration encounters, but also information provided by the Department of State or information that we've gleaned from other international partnerships, as well as
The
travel
same
data.
partnerships, I'm out of time, but if I can, Mr. Chairman, just a moment. I'm trying to establish here that you do process the same databases that you probably have, that we have here in the centers that we have here in Washington, D.C., to determine whether these individuals are suspected terrorists, watch list, yes, no?
The most important resource in this process is the CBP officer, the trained, skilled CBP officers, including our tactical terrorism response teams who interview the individuals that are suspected of having derogatory information.
And I'm gonna stop, I'm out of time, but what I was trying to establish, folks, is what's the bottleneck here? What's the problem at the border, okay? And why are officers overwhelmed? Why can't we make these quick decisions there? And what is it that it's gonna take? Tomorrow, we're gonna vote on a minibus, more green uniforms, very few blue uniforms. But is that the solution, or are we still looking at essentially swimming upstream? Mr. Chairman, I look forward to continuing this discussion. Thank you.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do always find the juxtaposition of comments from Mr. Correa and mine to be helpful to me, because I think you've hit on it. Before you can solve a problem, you've got to discern what it is. So if you're going to send more money for border agents to process people faster into the United States, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me that you're likely to have the result of fewer people coming into the United States. Just a guess. Well, no. I am, but I'm starting there. Believe me, I'm getting ready to. Believe me. Mr. Hunter, I was struck by the beginning of your testimony. You say, you give, at the beginning of your testimony, you listed causes of the significant increase in irregular migration: violence, food insecurity, severe poverty, corruption, climate change, fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic, dire economic conditions. That's 7. Let me ask you this. I'm looking at I think this is the National Immigration Law Center, a pro-immigration group, it described this, and it's one of them, you can find this description anywhere. On January 2021, just hours after being sworn in, President Joe Biden took several immigration-related actions that together signal a new era for immigration policy. They comprise an important first step redressing some of the ways in which immigrant communities have been profoundly harmed, in particular over the last 4 years, and towards the United States becoming more welcoming of immigrants and refugees. There's an appearance of Secretary Mayorkas on CNN that everybody's seen recently, in which he said, "We've rescinded so many Trump immigration policies, it would take so much time to list them." Too many to list. I wonder, as you were describing the causes of increases in migration, why did you omit all of those landmark changes in policy by the Biden administration?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the question. In illustrating the various drivers of irregular migration, I was highlighting why people are on the move. When it comes to policies,
Do those policies, those landmark policies, do they have anything to do with the significant increase in migration across the United States border that some of my colleagues are now saying is a crisis that Republicans need to solve?
Mr. Chairman, we have seen surges in irregular migration historically under presidents of both parties.
Right, I'm asking about these policies and whether they caused the crisis that we now see. Will you answer that question?
Mr. Chairman, no, our policies did not cause the reasons in rogue regimes such as Cuba, Nicaragua.
The rogue regimes had something to do with it, but not the dramatic change in policy by the Biden administration. Is that what you're testifying to this Congress?
The administration's policy and our strategy at DHS is to reduce irregular migration.
And you believe it's been successful then in reducing irregular migration?
Within the bounds of our authority and resources, we have a two-pronged approach to enact and enforce strict consequences.
Okay, enough. Ms. Youth, let me switch to you because you were very candid. You said since 2021, to address irregular migration and ensure our national security, the United States has led the largest expansion in decades of lawful pathways to the United States. So would you say that the increased migration across the southern border is a feature, not a bug?
No, so lawful pathways are the pathways that people can use to arrive safely through the southwest border, not through the southwest border.
That's not what I asked you, though.
Yeah.
What I asked you is, would you say that the increased flow across the border is a feature, not a bug, of the policies of the Biden administration?
No, I wouldn't say that it's a feature.
Is it a failure of the Biden administration then?
No, I wouldn't say that it's a failure. I would say that this is a symptom of something that is happening all over the world. There are more
And
than
certainly
100
not the fault of any Biden administration policy.
There are 110 million people who are displaced globally, and 20 million of them are displaced in this region. This is something that we're seeing throughout the globe. Our European partners are also facing similar challenges. This is not something that is simply...
I know we've seen what happens in Europe and elsewhere in the world when American leadership there fails too, but that doesn't explain why we've had the massive numbers from the beginning of the Biden administration across the U.S. border. But I think you've hit on it, that the most significant expansion in so-called lawful pathways. Let me ask this question. Doesn't the Congress make the law?
Yes, sir.
So the administration doesn't make law, does it?
No, sir.
That's exactly right. I've run out of time.
The gentleman yields, and we will perhaps have a second round of questioning, just to remind members. I now recognize Mrs. Ramirez for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Chairman Higgins. It's good to be in this joint committee hearing. So I'm gonna probably take it back a bit. I want to come back to the purpose of this hearing that's really examining CBP ONE. And I want to first acknowledge the advocates and stakeholders who have already provided feedback on CBP ONE's functionality and accessibility, as well as DHS's attempts to respond to their feedback. You know, being a millennial, we talk a lot about technology, and I know that including mobile apps, they can play a critical role in modernizing our systems if thoughtfully developed and deployed. However, in our search for border processing solutions, I do worry that sometimes we sacrifice our responsibility to uphold the rights and safety of asylum seekers, and if we don't have the adequate systems that promote equitable access to immigration options. Many issues with the CBP ONE app have been reported since its scheduling feature was rolled out. I've talked about it in a couple of the hearings here before. To name a few, the wait times to receive an appointment remain extremely long, and only a few ports of entry accept appointments, which has forced people, asylum seekers, to wait for months in Mexico, often in dangerous conditions and without the ability to support themselves. The app presents access issues for people who do not speak one of the three languages, as we know. It's Spanish, I think English and Korean. And for those that have low or no literacy or not technologically savvy, they may not have access to a smartphone or internet services. We've heard this before. We've talked about security concerns that have been raised regarding exploitation by bad actors and the collection of sensitive personal information. So for my first set of questions, I want to start with Ms. Sabatino. In 1 minute, could you please share with me what are CBP's plans to further address functionality issues with CBP ONE and make access to CBP ONE appointments more equitable? And as you're answering that, can you also follow up with what is CBP doing to further increase the number of daily available appointments?
Thank you for the question. And certainly with respect to the enhancements to the application, there's been 30 enhancements since this past summer to ensure that bandwidth issues or other error messages have been mitigated. What's also been challenging with respect to the use of the CBP ONE app is the cyber threats that we're up against. We have very comprehensive cyber strategy across CBP, not unique to CBP ONE, but we do encounter challenges, and we've had made significant enhancements to that as well. With respect to the wait times for individuals in Mexico, it's averaging about 2.5 months right now. We do have to take into consideration the operations at our ports of entry. We are not there just simply encountering inadmissible individuals who are attempting to enter the United States. We have the facilitation of lawful travel and trade. We also have to work outbound operations to interdict weapons and currency. And we have to make sure that we're intercepting narcotics, specifically fentanyl. So to ensure that we are not walking away from any of the missions, streamlining this process, ensuring that we can advance information to officers and automate it to the extent possible, but not also walk away from those other critical missions. We're not looking to expand the number of appointments.
So
at any of
we're
the
not,
ports.
you're not looking, yeah, let me stop you there then, because I want to pivot. Just want to make sure I had that on record. So we're not going to be expanding. I'm sure my colleagues on the other side are excited about that. So we're saying, and you also said that it's taking about 2.5 months for people that are waiting in Mexico, those that already have those appointments, and in some cases in really, really terrible conditions. We've read about that, and sometimes my colleagues, when they want to talk about caring about people, bring them up on the other side. So let me stop and let me just go ahead and pivot for a minute here. I want to ask, and actually this question I'm going to ask of Ms. Meckley here. In 30 seconds, that's all I have. How has the agency, in your opinion, consulted with those directly impacted by CBP ONE and border enforcement efforts and those that are impacted? Have you consulted with them as you're trying to make some of these many enhancements that folks talk about? In your opinion, can you give me a little bit of that?
Sure. When it comes to the ability to file, for a supporter to file an I-134A online, we've integrated the entire system and experience between USCIS and ICE, and CBP. There are parts of the process that USCIS is responsible for in terms of reviewing that 134A, and if a supporter is found to have the financial and other support, commitments and obligations are met, and that 134A is confirmed, then there is an exchange of information with CBP. So those systems.
My time is up. If we have another round, I'll follow up with you, but thank you. I yield back, Chairman.
The gentlelady yields. The gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Ezell, recognized for 5 minutes for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here today in this very important matter. I appreciate that. I want to highlight once again how this administration is making it much easier for illegal immigrants to enter this country. His DHS has rolled out a phone CBP ONE app. On this app, the migrants enter a few details before they receive an appointment that is supposed to be a vetting process. Let me describe the details of this process. During this appointment, it has been reported by the Texas Monthly magazine, and I quote, after arriving for their appointments, they are not given an interview, are asked no questions on the issues they submitted on the app, or about why they are coming to the United States. They are simply released into the country, end quote. I understand prior to their appointment, the information submitted is run through the U.S. criminal and national security databases. However, most of these individuals have never lived in the United States, so any crime would not be detected. Additionally, many of the migrants are attempting to come to the U.S. from countries that would never give us their criminal data, or from a country that doesn't even keep a criminal database. Being a law enforcement officer my entire life, I'm very familiar with running individuals, having been a chief of detective and a sheriff and a chief of police. And I know the only information that you get out of an NCIC or a criminal history check is something that has been entered into a database. I'd like to a little more explanation, and Ms. Sabatino, if you could talk to me a little bit about how intensive is this background, especially on somebody that's trying to deceive us or not give us proper information, or from a government that does not provide adequate information for us.
Thank you for the question. In addition to the law enforcement database that we query against, we also leverage the watch list, travel data. I mentioned the criminal records that you referenced, NCICs, but we also have a derogatory photo index that we match potentially their photos to identify individuals. But it really is important about the information sharing that we have, maybe not necessarily with the country the individual is coming from, but with a number of our other foreign partners. It is the information sharing across the hemisphere and globe, frankly, that makes us successful in identifying threats. But also there's a layer of, partnering with the intelligence community to make sure that we have visibility on trends, identities, or issues, and then inform our CBP officers for the process. And again, why getting that advance information for our officers is so critical, that they have the time to actually assess and prepare for the individuals arriving at ports.
Do you really think we're getting enough information on this app to adequately, and I'll just open that up to everybody, we're getting enough information on this app to be able to really thoroughly vet these people before they get into the country?
Thank you, sir. With respect to the information in the app, the biographic information, biometrics is also done through the app, the screening and matching against our facial DROG. But I think we're always looking for more information across all of our operational environments, whether it be trade or passenger operations. I think the more information sharing agreements that we can establish with our international partners, the better off we'll be.
What about developing sources, informants that would help identify some of these folks that are coming over here? How well is that working for you these days?
I think it's also important to note the over 70 locations in 40 countries where we do have foreign deployed CBP personnel that work directly with our foreign law enforcement partners, but not unique just to CBP. Certainly ICE has resources overseas, and this is this information sharing network that we also leverage.
You know, what we want here is a safe way to do this. And there's so many folks that are coming across this border, as we all know, and it's causing so many problems across the country. We've seen it on a daily basis, crimes that have been committed. And we have got, as law enforcement, step up, do everything within our power to make this happen so that we can protect Americans. Right now, the American people are on a daily basis calling us, complaining, telling us that this border is not secure. I've been down there myself. I've talked to the officers down there myself. I'm told they're not being allowed to do their jobs. I'm told they're not being able to completely do the things that they were hired to do because they're having to do other duties. I think that we really need to, going forward, take this a little more seriously. I know that you're following the orders of this administration, but I think that at some point we've got to step up and say, hey, look, this is enough, and do our job. So thank you very much again for this time.
Gentleman yields. I recognize Mr. Ivey, the gentleman from Maryland, for 5 minutes for question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hunter, you testified in your original statement that CBP ONE helps to cut out smugglers, and I wanted to give you a chance to elaborate on that. How exactly does that work?
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. What we are doing through CBP ONE in the border environment, as the Executive Assistant Commissioner has spoken to, is creating a scheduling tool that migrants themselves can access. So we're putting the power of determining where and when individuals present at a port of entry in the individual's hand. They are not relying on that smuggler to take them across between ports of entry. Further, because the app is accessible in central and northern Mexico, we don't need, and migrants themselves don't need to congregate in dangerous locations proximate to the border or be waiting near in long lines outside our ports of entry. They can be in another location and then come for their arrival at a scheduled and appointed time.
All right, and I wanted to ask you another question as well. Is it true that if a migrant has been fully cleared as a rightful refugee, that he or she is coming into the country legally and not illegally?
Yes, Congressman. In our U.S. refugee admissions program, those decisions are made overseas. We determine that an individual passes and qualifies as a refugee, and they are admitted as refugees.
All right,
Immigration status.
Commissioner Sabatino, I wanted to ask you about staffing. You have a pretty large domain that you preside over, and I think you've been asked a question about staffing already, but I did want to get a better feel for it because we've got some provisions floating around, potentially funding new positions, but the number I saw was there's a shortage of 4,000 CBP officers. Is that correct?
Thank you for the question. That number is absolutely based on our workload staffing model that identifies a need for approximately 4,000 CBP officers on the front line.
Okay, and I think there's also an issue about judges shortages too, which I wanted to, I'm sorry, officers examining asylum claims, and the number I have there is 800, is that right?
That sounds about right, Congressman. We can certainly have our budget folks confirm those numbers.
Okay, and then obviously these adding, getting the number, I don't know if we're gonna get to 4,000 all at once, but adding those additional hires or even working our way towards it, what sort of assistance would that provide to you? How would that help you to address the issues at the border?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. Certainly, bringing on incrementally is the best effort for us in terms of feasibility because of the training requirements. But the resource support also for our mission support personnel, our training capacity. Technology is also, investments in technology is very important to us. We do appreciate Congress's continued investment in non-intrusive inspection technology. Again, all part of our modernization efforts to enhance operations at the border. And again, put our officers back to doing what they do best, which is situational awareness.
On the technology piece, and I appreciate you raising that, when we went down to the border, one of the issues that came up was drones. And what we were told by some of the officers was that the cartels were using drones and they had more, and I guess better than we do down there. Now, that's like 6 or 7 months ago that we were down there, maybe longer. But I wanted to get your sense of, what you're seeing about drones and if we're, able to match what the cartels are doing with those.
I certainly would have to defer to the subject matter expertise of our Office of Air and Marine Operations, though there are very sophisticated efforts by the cartels to leverage drones to counter our operations and smuggle things across the border.
Okay. And one other question, too, I think with respect to judges, and that's the process of immigration judges, and that may be outside of your purview, but just from the standpoint of trying to expedite the process where these cases are resolved, so after they get from your bailiwick and move down the road, adding new judges, I mean, what kind of, what kind of backlog are they facing with respect to these cases, and what sort of additional resources would we need to address that?
Mr. Ranking Member, the immigration judges are with the Department of Justice Executive Office of Immigration Review, but you are right to observe that there are millions of cases in backlog there, and that's why cases may take 5 to 8 years. As you've invoked earlier, sir, the bipartisan Senate bill would give us new authorities and resources within the Department of Homeland Security and our Asylum Corps to bring that time down, if fully implemented, to 6 or 7 months.
I apologize for running over, Mr. Chairman, but thank you, and I yield back.
As the gentleman yields, recognize Mr. Luttrell, a gentleman from Texas, for 5 minutes. We're going to be calling recess after Mr. Luttrell's questioning. And, yeah, we have time. But after the gentleman from Texas questions, we're going to have to go into recess for votes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hunt, I'm going to piggyback on what Mr. Ivy asked you about the smugglers and how the CBP ONE app. Let's just make believe I've never been in a foreign country operating in a threat environment, maybe in this same space, but can you assure us that, and I've been to Mexico quite a bit, can you assure us that those migrants that are coming up through the country that are accessing the CBP ONE app are not in any way in a marshaling area under command and control, and then handed their device to move forward and then tracked while they're in country for whatever reason, either a coordinated movement inside the country, or a plot to do something specific? You know, my concern is when it comes to the AI space and how, you know, you can say nefarious actors, you can say whatever you want, but that exists. So are we sure that the CBP ONE app is secured? Because I can assure you, if I tried hard enough, I could probably tell you every single phone number in your phone if you gave me about 30 minutes.
Thank you, Congressman, for the question. With the smugglers and the cartels, we in the department will never say never, because they are resourced and they are motivated and they're making a profit at the expense of migrants. What I can say is what we are doing through CBP ONE is trying to cut out the smugglers at every step we can. So by putting more power in the hands of the individual migrants to schedule their appointment, we're taking that power away from the smuggling organizations who have tended to use large groups and to enter between ports of entry. So we're giving a pathway for migrants to have an alternative so they're not required to work with the smugglers on that irregular entry.
Does it seem like the individuals that are coming through the port of entry under the CBP ONE app fall in any specific categories, fighting age males? Is it something that we're monitoring? Ms. Sabatino?
Thank you for the question, but the demographics change even port by port. We can certainly provide an overview of what the demographics are, and I think a fulsome briefing really on what the security measures are. It'd probably take too long in this hearing, but to really walk through individually what those security measures are for the enhancement and to ensure, like, geolocation is only pinged to that phone when an individual, just to determine where they are at the time that they tried to opt in or schedule that appointment.
Okay. Ms. Meckley, can I make the assessment that you are the subject matter expert on immigration and immigration policy?
I would not.
Is anybody on that panel?
I would say Mr. Hunter.
Would you? All right, you're lucky day, sir. My dear friend, Ms. Ramirez, and I chat quite a bit, and I wish Mr. Garcia was here because he often holds up a whiteboard with the immigration policy on it, and it's absolutely horrific. I'm curious if the department, if anybody on your side has in any way tried to restructure the immigration policy so it is more streamlined to present to us in any recent memory? Or is she just completely throw you under the bus?
No, I'm happy to take the question, Congressman, and my colleague from USCIS. If you're asking, Congressman, our immigration policies, our immigration law, our framework is complicated, is outdated, and is a patchwork. So
are you telling me that or asking me?
No, I'm affirming that.
Okay, good.
That
All
is
right,
indeed
good.
your
We agree.
question. Yes, and has been outdated to provide the flexibility and tools that we need in the 21st century.
True. Are you waiting on us to write it up here, or are you guys gonna?
Well, we have, I know the president did submit a bill very early in the administration that outlined some reforms, and there was collaboration and technical assistance provided on the bipartisan Senate measure just 2 months ago, which really squarely gets at this issue of the asylum backlog and the resources we need to bring that down, which will disincentivize people from arriving who have non-meritorious claims.
Well, just considering you and your organization and those underneath, I mean, I'd be talking directly to the person, but I bet you know who it is. You are the subject matter experts. Amongst everything else that we deal with in the House of Representatives, we look to you for answers and guidance. I think that's a fair assessment. It would be, and I'm going to speak for Morgan on this one. If you came to my office with a revised immigration policy plan, I would be happy to look at it. I will walk across the hall to her office and say, what do you think? Then she and I would beat each other up, and then we'd probably come to another agreement, come back and beat you up a little bit, and then the process is started instead of us beating each other up every single solitary day about immigration policy and border security. And then when we walk out of this meeting, nothing happens. But that time is absolutely needs to go bye-bye. So I'm actually putting the basketball on your court, sir. And I'd be happy to revisit. If you'd be happy to schedule a meeting with me and that young lady over there, I'm sorry if I'm speaking for you. I like the young lady. You're welcome.
Congressman, we in the department will be delighted to engage
Perfect.
you and other members of the committee on substantive.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Recognize Mr. Swazi from New York. 5 minutes for question, and then the gentleman's name is, he knows I'm from Louisiana. It's a difficult name.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Luttrell, before you go, I want to be in on that meeting. I want to invite Mr. Bishop and Mr. Ivey as well to come to that meeting. And I want to use the bipartisan Senate bill as a framework for us to start our conversation. So you said, Mr. Hunter, in your testimony that you removed or returned nearly 600,000 individuals this year.
Congressman, thank you for the question. It's actually been more. It was 630,000 just in the past 10 months.
So do you think that we could remove or return many, many more people if we had more border agents, more immigration judges, more detention beds, and revised policy as proposed in the Senate bipartisan bill?
Yes, Congressman, if there are more individuals who are not, who under their, who do not have the legal basis to remain in the country, then we have the capacity to remove.
So there are many people that don't have a legal basis to be here. We could conjecture, based upon the fact that you said earlier 70% of the people would be denied asylum if they were properly processed. And I've heard numbers as high as 80 or 90%. So, you know, we keep on hearing about the 5,000 people a day, 5,000 people a day. We don't want 5,000 people a day coming under the bipartisan Senate proposal, but those would be 5,000 applicants for asylum. If they were properly processed with the proper number of immigration judges, proper number of border security agents, proper number of detention beds, and revised policy that's been proposed in the bipartisan Senate proposal, then 90% of those 5,000, let's say 80% or 70% using your number before, but I've heard 90%, would be in fact returned within 6 months instead of going through a 3-year, 4-year, 5-year, 8-year process. Is that correct?
Generally speaking, Congressman, that's my understanding.
So unlike what Mr. Bishop said before, the purpose of processing more people is not to let more people into the country. The purpose of processing more cases with more judges, more border security agents, more detention beds, and a better process is to actually deny the cases that will ultimately be denied, but now takes 3, 5, 9 years to get done. If we did it in 6 months, 70 to 90% of those people would be returned in a very short period of time and would never be released into the country because they'd actually be processed at the facility while staying in detention facilities. Is that correct?
So, Congressman, what I'd underscore is we value our ability to welcome and accept asylum.
And we all do.
In this country.
We all do. But right now, that system is being corrupted by the cartels that we hear about all the time. People that are getting paid $7,000 to $10,000 per person in a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, and they are corrupting our system by telling people, hey, make sure you say this, make sure you say that, and then because of our wonderful nature of the United States of America, these people are being put through a process, but that process is taking too damn long. It's taking 3 years, 5 years, 9 years. We want to fix that process. Instead of just arguing about it here, we want to fix that process. We want to process the cases, and we want to return 70 to 90% of the people in a short period of time. So I want to take Mr. Luttrell up. I want to invite Mr. Bishop. I want to invite Mr. Ivey. I want to invite anybody else who wants to come. Let's start with the Senate bipartisan compromise that was negotiated by Ms. Sinema and Mr. Murphy and a wonderful gentleman from Oklahoma who I think is very conservative, ethical, honest, and hardworking, Mr. Lankford. Let's use that as a basis, and let's use that framework that was negotiated over a 4-month period, and let's find an answer to this problem. Instead of just fighting about it over and over again, let's actually do our jobs and fix it. And let's process these cases, deport the people that should be deported, and treat the other people that deserve to come to the United States of America under our historic generosity to the world, and let them in. But the rest of them, let's stop them from breaking the rules and let's get them out. But to do that, Ms. Sabatino needs the resources, Ms. Meckley needs the resources, the Department of State needs the resources, you need the resources. You need border agents, you need immigration judges, you need detention beds, and you need a refined process that will stop people from breaking the system, breaking the rules. So we can do it. It's pretty straightforward. I'm new to Congress. I just got here recently, but I've been watching TV, and we're all freaking out when we see that what's going on at the border. All these people coming every day. It's driving us crazy. People are freaking out. Democrats and Republicans and independents are worried about the broken system. And it's because of the fact, not because Joe Biden and the executive, COVID's over. There was a surge before COVID under President Trump, if you remember. Remember the whole thing with the kids in the cages and stuff? There was a surge before COVID. It went down during COVID. There's a surge again once COVID was relieved. There's more refugees in the world, as Ms. Youth pointed out. There's 110 million refugees, displaced persons, and asylum seekers in the world now, the biggest number since World War II by quadruple. People are fleeing misery, and they'll do whatever it takes to try and come to the greatest country in the world, the United States of America. We got to fix the process that is designed to deal with 400,000 people a year, not 2.5 million people a year. Let's work together. Let's fix the problem. Let's do our jobs. Thank you very much for your testimony today. I appreciate you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The committee going to go into recess and we'll reconvene 5 minutes after votes for members to return. We thank the panelists for your patience. The committee is now in recess. You've been quite tolerant of the impossible to anticipate House voting schedule. My colleague, Mr. Brasheen, is recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So something we've gone down before, we're talking about the CBP ONE app. It was created, of course, in 2020, in October. And then the app was utilized by this administration to be increased. Originally, the app was to alleviate the wait times for cargo inspection at ports, but then Secretary Mayorkas, Mr. Hunter, made the decision to let aliens schedule border appointments with the app, started in 2022-23. Over 95% now of the 459,000 aliens who have arrived at port of entry have been paroled and released into the country. 95% of those who apply. That's important to note. In addition, CBP ONE has been used to fly 386,000 foreign nationals from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela into U.S. airports. I want to just pause because I think when the news of this last couple of weeks broke that 386,000 foreign nationals from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela got on a plane, flown into the United States, I think Democrat, Republican, the average American said, "You've got to be kidding me." Secretary Mayorkas claims that this widespread use of the CBP ONE app is good because it supposedly reduces illegal border crossings. In reality, the Biden administration is simply shifting the flow of illegals from between ports of entry to this new process, this, quote, modern process. Let's really be clear. We're talking about inadmissible aliens. Just think about the term. You guys use it. I know you're using the term migrant also often a lot. I'm not trying to be flippant. I think it's really sad that we've moved to a place where we're trying to confuse the American people and call these people migrants. Mr. Hunter, no offense intended, but I think it's really sad that we're wordsmithing. They're illegal aliens. You guys you continue to use the word inadmissible because that's supposed to mean something. This is illegal. So to talk about how the CBP ONE app has caused people now to go to ports of entry, and what many times they were being turned away, now they're not. 95% of those who use the app are released in the interior of the United States. Just compare some year differences. Those who used to go to the ports of entry, they were inadmissible aliens, 115,000 per month now in 2024, compared to 20,000 in 2020. So 115,000 now are going to the ports of entry compared to 20,000 in 2020. Why? Because of the marketing campaign of the Biden administration. And when we use the term, there's 110 million migrants. Somebody tell me this tsunami that hit South America that I missed that was in the news. I'll tell you what's happened. Man, it's hard not to be flippant when the American people know that they are being hoodwinked by this administration on this, y'all. There's not 110 million, that's 1/3 of the population of the United States, migrants that have had this migrant crisis. They're coming because President Biden put a marketing campaign out when he took office and said, come on in illegally. That's truth. There's not been this massive hurricane that's hit South America. South America's not underwater. People are coming here because our laws are not standing for truth anymore. All right, Ms. Meckley, under the CHNV parole program, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services states that after an alien receives advanced travel authorization in the United States, the alien is responsible for securing their own travel via air to international airport to the international airport in the United States. How does the U.S. government determine who provides the funding for aliens' airfare to the United States? Let me ask it a different way. We've got NGOs, non-government organizations, that are helping people break the laws. It's ridiculous. Can you guarantee this body that funding from the U.S. taxpayer through NGOs is not helping sponsor people? The 386,000 people that have been flown into the interior United States. Can you guarantee this body, U.S. taxpayers, in addition to this madness of them not doing regular process, flowing from their country into the United States, that the U.S. taxpayer inadvertently through NGOs is not paying for that?
Sir, my role at USCIS is to oversee the reviews of the I-134A process, so I am responsible for the execution of that part of helping facilitate the information getting to CBP for them to make the parole determinations. As we do that, when we review the 134A, part of that review is looking at evidence for how the supporter will provide financial and other support to that beneficiary should CBP decide to parole that individual into the United States.
I need to do this just because of my time. Yes or no? Can you guarantee the taxpayer they're not footing the bill for the flight cost of bringing these people in through NGOs?
Sir, I don't know whether or not it is. As I'm saying, is we review the 134A and they have to provide financial documentation that says they can support that individual during and throughout the parole validity period.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back to you, but I'll just note, there's no confidence from this administration that NGO funding, that the taxpayer's not picking up the $500 to $1,000 per flight expense to fly them in also.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman, our colleague, Mr. Crane, is recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start with you, Mr. Hunter. You made some statements today talking about the causation of this crisis that we see at our southern border. You cited poverty, corruption, climate change, to name a few. Is that correct? I want to run by some actual quotes from President Biden for you real quick. On September 12th, 2019, then candidate Biden said, "We're a nation who says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come." Did you hear that? Did you hear him say that, sir? Yes or no?
I didn't specifically hear that quote.
Okay, thank you. On June 27th, 2019, candidate Biden, "Those who come seeking asylum, we should immediately have the capacity to absorb them, keep them safe." Did you hear him say that?
I don't specifically recall that quote, sir.
Okay. Would you agree with those statements, though, that we should absorb them? That we should have the capacity to absorb them? We should do that?
Congressman, we're required under law to inspect individuals who present, and individuals do have the right to seek asylum in the United States.
So would you add that to your list now that we've gone over that it wasn't just it's not poverty, corruption, climate change, a tsunami, like my friend here, Mr. Burkeen, was talking about? Do you think that one of two people that could have been the president of the United States, the leader of the free world, saying that to the entire country and to the entire world during a television hearing, do you think that had anything to do with what we're seeing now at the southern border?
Congressman, it sounds like it is a recognition that there are people who are fleeing persecution, and in my reference to the particular governments, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela, there are individuals who are fleeing persecution under those regimes.
Okay, so one of the leaders of the free world said, hey, if you want to come here, you should come, right? So, all right, that's really what's going on here. That's what my friend, Mr. Burkeen, was talking about. That's what many people are talking about up here. You know, this isn't the, global climate, movement that many of my colleagues on the other side are trying to make it out to be. A lot of what it is globalism, sir. There are a lot of people around the world that are very, very powerful, and they don't want anybody to have borders. They want globalism. World Economic Forum is one of them, and that's unfortunately, what many of our leaders actually take their cue from. What do you guys have to say to Americans who are living in fear every day of another terrorist attack? Let's start with you, Ms. Sabatino.
No, thank you for the question. We invest significant resources, starting with our National Targeting Center, which is also plays a significant role in the screening and vetting of individuals, whether they're through these processes or any individuals arriving to the U.S.
What do you guys have to say to Americans who have seen their schools, hospitals, and community spaces overtaken by migrants? You guys have any, you get a chance, you're on TV right now, do you guys have anything to say to them? What about, do you have anything to say to Americans who are afraid the cartels are taking over their towns? How about anything to say to Americans who have lost their children to fentanyl? Do you guys have anything to say to them? Go ahead, Mr. Hunter.
Congressman, in regards to the irregular migration challenges, it is a singular focus of our department to reduce irregular migration in the hemisphere and unlawful entry out.
Okay, well, thank you for that, but you're doing a horrible job, and the American people know it, okay? I mean, you guys are doing the worst job in the history of this country. So the fact that you even answered that as if that's your responsibility just shows me tells me how detached from reality you absolutely are. Mr. Hunter, where were you on 9/11, sir? Do you remember where you were?
I do indeed, Congressman. I was working in Washington, D.C. At an NGO on DuPont Circle at the time.
What about you, Ms. Sabatino? Where were you?
I was an immigration inspector at John F. Kennedy International Airport.
You remember exactly where you were that day?
I do.
Ma'am, what about you? You remember?
Yeah, I worked for the Executive Office for U.S. Attorney's Department of Justice.
Ms. Youth?
I was serving in Madrid at the time, but I was in Geneva at a training.
Okay. Well, the reason I asked you guys that, do you remember what Americans were saying right after that? Do you remember what Americans were saying? Do you remember saying never again? We're never going to let this happen again? You guys remember that? Yes or no? Go ahead, Ms. Youth. Do you remember Americans saying that?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Meckley?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Sabatino?
Yes.
Well, guess what, guys? It's going to happen again. It's not a question of if, it's a question of when. And for every one of you guys that has sat by and supported these policies and these tools that we're talking about today that have allowed and expedited this mass migration into the United States, you're going to share a little bit of that ownership, all right? That changed so many of our lives forever. We said never again, and here we are implementing policies and tools that are making it so easy for individuals who don't love this country, who want to do harm to this country. And we're not talking about everybody. We know there are plenty of people who just want to come here for a better life. But you guys all know there are plenty of people in this country right now that want to do Americans harm. And this is my question for you, and we don't have time to answer it, but I want you to think about this. When the next major attack, like 9/11 or a series of 9/11s happen in this country, will you still continue to support these policies and these tools? Because we're not going to forget it. We're not going to forget who was at the helm. We're not going to forget who was in these positions. We're not going to forget the policies. We're not going to forget the tools. And we're not going to forget the committee hearings like we had today, where you guys could have condoned this administration, and you guys didn't. All right? Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. The gentlewoman, Ms. Green, is recognized for 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Crane, for pointing out the most important things that people outside of this city talk about. While you all are paid with a taxpayer-funded paycheck, I want you to know that most Americans are concerned exactly about what Mr. Crane talked about. There's also many Americans, like in my home state of Georgia, that are still grieving the death of a young woman named Laken Riley, who was brutally murdered by an illegal alien that came into this country in Venezuela, who had injured a child in New York, was not deported. In my district, fentanyl is a real problem. It's a serious problem. Fentanyl doesn't discriminate based on politics or identity, sexual orientation, or race. Fentanyl is killing people every single day. And it's also something that's extremely concerning for everyone in my district. This is such an outrage to most Americans. And again, they pay all of our paychecks with their hard-earned tax dollars, that our country is under invasion. It is an invasion. Now, while we believe that people should legally immigrate to America and follow the laws, all of our laws are being completely broken. And the fact that over 10 million people have come in our country and there's 2 million gotaways on your watch, 2 million gotaways that are capable of doing something like Mr. Crane just talked about, a terrorist attack, or the daily crime committed against innocent Americans, whether it's a tragic car accident that kills Americans in the car, whether it is a fentanyl poisoning, a murder the fentanyl comes from China to Mexico and comes into our country, or whether it's a brutal murder like what happened to Laken Riley. It's happening every single day. The CBP ONE app is the most fascinating thing to me. While Congress just banned TikTok, we have this app that our government funds that it's shocking statistics. More than 459,000 individuals have scheduled Southwest border appointments with the CBP ONE app since January 2023, and 96% of those scheduled appointments with the app were issued a notice to appear and paroled into the country. 96%. The CBP ONE app is like a welcoming app. Welcome to America. Come on in. You aren't vetting people. We've heard from witnesses before our committee. We heard from one mother whose daughter was horrifically raped and murdered, and the man that raped and murdered her daughter had gang tattoos and cartel tattoos all over him. And he was allowed in the country. And he brutally raped and murdered her daughter, and her daughter's boyfriend still has the voicemail on his phone of her last 2 minutes of life while she was calling him in panic. And that voicemail is her being raped and murdered. This is what our country is dealing with. And it seems to fall on deaf ears when we talk to witnesses like you. It's unbelievable. Ms. Sabatino, according to DHS, applicants for the CHNV program, quote, undergo a clear and robust security vetting, end quote. A clear and robust security vetting. In order to obtain advanced travel authorization through CHNV parole program, an individual provides biometric information, including a photograph, using the CBP ONE app. Now, on our committee, well, they're all gone, there are Democrats that signed a letter, literally signed a letter, saying that it's unfair, completely unfair that transgender migrants have to provide a photo. That's unfair to them. And they would like to take away the photo requirement on the CBP ONE app. Are all individuals in the CHNV parole process required to submit biographical information through CBP ONE?
Biographic and biometric, it's the photo.
Can you imagine not having a photo?
The facial biometric matching is a significant security enhancement to the CBP ONE app.
Are you keeping criminals out of our country with the CBP ONE app?
The CBP ONE app really is just the tool to move the information, but we are taking the biographic and biometric information and matching it against watch lists, our law enforcement's databases, travel data, criminal records, as well as our derogatory photo index.
So do you sleep good at night? Like, do you know for a fact that you're keeping these criminals out of our country with the CBP ONE app? You're confident that you're keeping out rapists, murderers, cartel members, you're terrorists, you're confident that you're keeping them out of our country?
Congresswoman, as a 26-year career employee, I'm very well aware of the challenges that we are up against, and I sleep well knowing that our CBP officers and frontline personnel are doing their level best to protect the American communities.
So CBP ONE app processes the information and expedites people from over 160 countries around the world into our country, and you sleep good at night and you're confident in the CBP ONE app.
The CBP ONE app doesn't expedite individuals. It actually affords advanced information to our officers to do that robust vetting and screening, and the facial, obtaining the photos to do the facial biometric match to our DROG index.
So you don't think already having the information in an app with the photo, when the migrants can come and select a date and time to come meet with Border Patrol, that doesn't expedite the process? You're saying that's not an expedition of the process?
I think I can highlight a number of instances over the last 10 years where migrants showing up at our ports of entry without any advance information quickly overwhelm our teams and then redirect our teams from doing things like interdicting fentanyl or outbound operations, seizing weapons and currency that funds the cartels. We have a lot of different disciplines and responsibilities at the ports of entry. Without that streamlined modern process, we would be solely focused on processing individuals who are required to afford the opportunity to request asylum at our ports of entry.
Sure, so maybe thousands of people showing up at one time at a port of entry or at the border along the way it would be considered an invasion. That's what most Americans are calling it. And most Americans are against the fact that their taxpayer dollars are having to pay for a handy-dandy app that people can download and enter the information so they can be expedited into America. It's outrageous. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to go ahead and yield. Thank you.
The gentlelady yields, and the chair has been quite generous with time today to both sides of the aisle. And I'm happy to recognize the ranking member.
I'm going to pass.
Any response? We have agreed to submit further questions in writing. Panelists, out of respect for your time, you've been here all day and quite patient with our interruptions of anticipated schedule. So I thank the witnesses for their testimony and the members for their question. The members of the subcommittees may have additional questions for the witnesses, and we would ask the witnesses to respond to these in writing. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7 Delta, the hearing record will be held open for 10 days. Without objection, the subcommittees stand adjourned.